The original Star Trek episode, Journey to Babel, is one of the most popular among fans. In fact, I've personally rewatched it twice in preparation for this video, and I still find it enjoyable. A lot of significant things happen in this episode that help to build the universe in Star Trek. We get to see Spock's mom and dad, we're introduced to other races that make up the Federation, such as the Andorians and the Tellarites. In this episode, one of the most interesting battles in Star Trek history takes place, where the Enterprise is attacked by a ship built for a singular purpose: to catch and destroy the Enterprise. Let's use some CG animations to break down what happens in this battle. The Federation occasionally has a kind of summit or conference of sorts among its major members called the Babel Conference, where a number of ambassadors representing different planets debate and vote on various issues. Babel is not the name of the planet, but a code name for where the conference is to take place. The Enterprise is tasked with picking up the participating ambassadors from each planet and transporting them to Babel. Vulcan is the Enterprise's last stop before proceeding to Babel, where Sarek and his wife Amanda are brought aboard and revealed to be Spock's parents. And of course, Spock is slightly estranged from his father. A whole B-plot takes place that is great character development. But right as the Enterprise leaves Vulcan, or perhaps directly after, Uhura picks up a strong alien signal of unknown origin. She cannot determine the signal source or decode its meaning. I believe that the signal has originated from the Enterprise itself and is outgoing, although this is not specified at this point. This may have been a way to transmit the vector and heading of the Enterprise as it leaves Vulcan. Perhaps enough information is transmitted for another ship to track it and intercept it. And sure enough, a small scout-sized ship appears at extreme range, pacing the Enterprise. Its configuration is unknown and unusual. Kirk wants a closer look at the strange little ship and has the Enterprise begin an intercept vector. The other ship turns towards the Enterprise and, as if to show off what it can do, passes at warp 10. A resurrected starships, you say? In Voyager, it is established that warp 10 cannot be achieved. Ah, what kind of nerd are you? This is original Star Trek, not that watered-down techno-sinfulness that sometimes comes up in Voyager and New Star Trek. You could tackle this two ways. You could say that the writers of Voyager goofed all those years later, and they did, in my opinion. However, the popular in-universe explanation is that this thing is using the old-scale warp drive. Warp speeds some 70 years later go by a different scale. I'm also aware that, again in Voyager, oh Voyager, you naughty canon-breaking series, Tom Paris states a rule of thumb that he pretty much just pulls out of his cute little tuchus. Faster than light, no left, no right. This is very inconsistent with many parts of Star Trek, where in-warp course changes are a matter of, well, course. Pardon the pun. And you will see this demonstrated shortly. But the main point of this is that for the time, warp 10 is very fast and not something that the Enterprise is capable of matching, perhaps even beyond what any Federation, Romulan, or Klingon ship can do in this era of Star Trek. Now, before the battle takes place, it is important to note all the geopolitical machinations going on. The primary business of the Babel Conference is whether to admit the planet Corridon into the Federation. Corridon is very rich in dilithium, and without the Federation's protection and infrastructure, the planet is vulnerable to exploitation by many shady parties, including, most unfortunately, Tellarite miners, according to Sarek. This creates a point of contention within the Federation. And a bit later, another even shadier group will be revealed to have an interest in the Corridon dilithium crystals. Uhura reports that a signal is transmitted from the alien ship, and the reception point is oddly on the Enterprise. The Tellarite ambassador is mysteriously murdered, and Sarek, although a suspect at first, is taken ill by a heart condition. On top of this, Kirk is attacked by an Andorian and suffers a nasty stab wound. All of this creates a great deal of chaos among the Enterprise command crew. Since Spock has to be a blood donor for his father to undergo a life-saving surgery, McCoy proposes he turn command over to Scotty. Of course, stubborn Spock refuses, choosing duty over family because of the dangerous situation, but Kirk tricks Spock into stepping down by faking that he is recovered from his injury. Right as Kirk is about to hand command over to Scotty, the alien ship approaches at warp 8. I would say that the Enterprise is cruising at a fast speed of warp 6 or 7, but warp 8 is probably nearing the Enterprise's maximum speed. I've been unable to visualize what space combat at warp speed looks like until now, and perhaps it was something like this. Alright, let's play that again in slow motion, and I will explain my new theories about combat at warp speed. First things first, the requirements for high warp. The Enterprise has power to shields and phasers while maintaining its current speed. That takes some power, perhaps more so than impulse. But here is the other question. Can phasers punch through a warp bubble at warp speed and hit another object also traveling at warp speed? I believe they can if the weapons hit while both ships have matched their warp speeds, even if for an instant. You must think of both ships traveling upon a kind of fabric or wave of space that is moving in and of itself. Like if you were playing these battles on a tabletop board game, think of the game map itself as moving at warp 6, and both ships upon the game map are firing on each other, perhaps making some maneuvers relative to each other as they share the same warp factor. As long as they do, the target locks can be established. But if you fire at a ship that is then able to shift to a higher warp factor, perhaps one beyond the capabilities of your ship, then you cannot hit them. This scenario is demonstrated when the Orion ship comes in for another attack. The Enterprise fires phasers, but the alien ship is able to shift back up to warp 8 before the phasers can hit. It is also apparent that the alien ship is able to accelerate to a higher warp quite swiftly. Luckily, as Chekhov states, the alien ship is using standard phasers, something the Enterprise can take for a time, but not forever. While the attack happens, Spock realizes something about the power signature of the attacking ship, which could lead to its identification, and actually tries to get up and walk out of surgery. Luckily, he is sedated. Another attack occurs, and this time, photon torpedoes are prepared. In this situation, it is unlikely that the torpedoes can make a direct hit any more than phasers can. My theory about this is as follows. Since photon torpedoes have a powerful matter-antimatter warhead, they may be able to collapse a warp bubble. For those of you that think that photon torpedoes cannot be fired at warp, well, they can. In fact, the TNG technical manual indicates that these have warp sustainer coils. Can they accelerate to a higher warp and catch the attacker? I find it unlikely, unless each one has its own independent warp drive. But they are fired anyway. The explosions occur in the path of the attacking ship, far enough away from the Enterprise so as not to collapse her warp bubble. However, the alien ship is far out of reach by the time the torpedoes detonate. Then things get serious. Number 4 shield buckles. Auxiliary power is allocated to the shields. However, the shield is still weak. Another hit on that shield arc will take it down altogether. The next attack takes out shield number 2. This may have actually been a shield penetration, since damage control teams are ordered to cover all decks. It's time to do what Kirk does best: improvise in a desperate situation. Except for phasers, he orders all power to the port side of the ship cut. We can also assume at this point Enterprise is forced to drop out of warp. And then power to the starboard side is cut. The Enterprise goes dark and starts to drift. Now I love how the spy, surgically altered to look like an Andorian, is brought to the bridge here. He sort of becomes the face of the enemy. He soon realizes that Kirk is baiting the alien ship to lure them in. At this point, one may ask, why wouldn't the alien ship simply make another flyby attack and go to warp? Well, they may have actually made an error at this point, but I'll talk a little bit later why the alien ship may not have been able to do this. But Chekhov manages to lock phasers on the target almost immediately as the alien ship drops out of warp. I can only theorize that at non-warp speeds, ships are much easier to target. Either way, the Enterprise fires. Only one hit is needed, and this severely damages the alien ship. Shortly thereafter, it self-destructs, as does the alien spy, through slow poison. Luckily, Spock and his father also survived the surgery, and Spock reveals that the attackers were the Orions. Since the power output of the small ship was so enormous, It seemed to be custom built for a suicide mission. The Orions would prefer the Corridon system to remain outside of the Federation, so that they can go on raiding it for the dilithium. Now let's dig into this Orion ship. Yes, I created this ship model because I felt that we could make something better than the blip of light we got in the original version of the episode, but also something more suitable than the ship made for the digital remastered version of this episode, and because it was just fun to make. How is it that this little ship can achieve such speeds? Well, it's a custom build. What we may have here is a conventional ship with a supercharged warp canard type assembly built onto it. No doubt that maintaining dangerously high warp speeds creates a lot of excess heat and plasma, so you would need some hardware to deal with that. It also means sacrificing a lot of other things like armor and shields. Then we just slap on an oversized matter-antimatter reactor. Such a ship would be very dangerous to operate safely. In fact, by the time the ship drops out of warp to attack the Enterprise, its warp coils may have been so cooked that it couldn't jump back to warp again. It takes a lot more energy to activate and accelerate to warp speed than it does to maintain a given warp speed. So yeah, this was a great episode. In this era of Star Trek, there just aren't many ships that can take on a Constitution-class heavy cruiser by themselves and very nearly destroy it. So feel free to go to the comments and let's see who finally gets the last word. May you be good, and may you fly boldly somewhere out there, space friends.